A dog asks the police for help. They follow it, and when they arrive at the scene, they're terrified by what they see. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when officers Robert Martinez and Claire Thompson began their morning patrol through the sleepy village of Santo Amaro. The quaint streets were still bathed in the soft golden light of dawn, and the only sounds were the occasional chirping of birds and the distant rumble of fishermen's boats heading out to sea. Robert, a seasoned officer with salt and pepper hair and kind brown eyes, sipped his coffee as he drove their patrol car down the cobblestone streets. His partner, Claire, a sharp-witted woman in her mid-30s with fiery red hair, gazed out the window, admiring the colorful facades of the colonial-era buildings. "Looks like another quiet day in paradise," Robert mused, a contented smile playing on his lips. Claire nodded in agreement. Medium-sized dog with intelligent eyes and a wagging tail. It barked once and then twice, its gaze fixed intently on the two officers. Robert and Claire exchanged puzzled glances. "That's odd," Robert remarked. "I've never seen this dog around town before." The dog barked again, more urgently this time, and began to trot down the street, periodically looking back at the patrol car as if beckoning them to follow. Claire's brow furrowed. "Robert, I know this sounds crazy, but I think it wants us to follow it." Robert hesitated for a moment, then put the car in gear. "Well, it's not like we have any pressing matters to attend to. Let's see where this leads us." As they slowly followed the dog through the winding streets of Santo Amaro, neither officer could shake the feeling that their quiet morning was about to become far more eventful than they had anticipated. The dog led them out of the village center, past the last row of brightly painted houses, and onto a dirt road that snaked through overgrown fields. Robert and Claire exchanged worried glances as they realized where they were heading: the old Santos warehouse, abandoned for years and rumored to be haunted. "I don't like this, Robert," Claire muttered, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her holstered weapon. Robert nodded grimly. "Me neither, but we've come this far. We might as well see it through." As they approached the dilapidated structure, the dog's behavior became even more agitated. It ran circles around the patrol car, barking incessantly, until Robert brought the vehicle to a stop a short distance from the warehouse's rusted gates. The moment the car stopped, the dog darted towards a gap in the chain-link fence surrounding the property. It slipped through effortlessly and disappeared into the tall grass beyond. "Should we call for backup?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. Robert considered for a moment, then shook his head. "Not yet. Let's take a look around first. For all we know, this could be nothing more than a wild goose chase." They cautiously approached the fence, scanning the area for any signs of danger. The warehouse loomed before them, its windows broken and its walls covered in graffiti. The air was thick with the musty smell of decay and neglect. As they squeezed through the gap in the fence, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. "Robert," she whispered, "do you get the feeling we're not alone here?" Before he could answer, a series of sharp barks echoed from inside the warehouse. The dog had apparently found its way inside and was calling for them to follow. With a shared look of determination, Robert and Claire drew their weapons and approached the building's main entrance. The rusted door creaked ominously as Robert pushed it open, revealing a cavernous interior shrouded in darkness. "Hello?" Robert called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone here?" The only response was another bark from the dog, somewhere deep within the warehouse. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, they could make out rows of abandoned machinery and stacks of rotting crates. Slowly, carefully, they made their way deeper into the building, following the sound of the dog's increasingly frantic barks. The air grew thicker, filled with dust and the unmistakable odor of something off. "Robert," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you smell that?" He nodded grimly. "Yeah, something's not right here." As they rounded a corner, they finally spotted the dog. It was standing at the far end of a long corridor, its tail wagging slowly as it stared at something on the ground. With growing trepidation, Robert and Claire approached. As they drew closer, the shape on the floor began to take form. It was large, oddly shaped, and covered with a dirty tarp. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she reached out to pull back the covering, whatever lay beneath. She knew their quiet morning in Santo Amaro was about to become far more complicated than they could have ever imagined. Claire's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the tarp. With a deep breath, she pulled it back, steeling herself for what they might find underneath. As the covering fell away, both officers gasped in shock. Before them lay not a body, as they had feared, but a collection of items that sent a chill down their spines. Children's toys, some broken and others pristine, were scattered across the floor. Alongside them were piles of clothing, small t-shirts, tiny shoes, and colorful backpacks. In the center of this disturbing display was a large cork board covered in photographs and newspaper clippings. "Oh my God," Claire breathed, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Robert, look at this." They stepped closer to examine the board. The photos showed children of various ages, all smiling innocently at the camera. The newspaper clippings, however, told a far darker story. Headlines screamed about missing children from towns and villages across the region, some dating back several years. Robert's face paled as he connected the dots. This is evidence of child abductions. But why here? Why Santo Amaro? As they continued to examine the makeshift evidence board, Claire noticed something odd about one of the photos. "Robert, doesn't this boy look familiar to you?" Robert leaned in, squinting at the image. It showed a young boy with bright blue eyes and a mop of curly black hair. After a moment, recognition dawned on his face. "That's Miguel Santos. He went missing from the next town over about 6 months ago. His parents were devastated." Claire nodded grimly. "I remember the case. We helped with the search. But there was never any trace of him." As they continued to process the horrifying discovery, the dog that had led them there suddenly began to growl, its hackles raised, and it stared intently at the warehouse entrance. Robert and Claire spun around, weapons at the ready, just as a figure appeared in the doorway. The silhouette was unmistakably male, tall and broad-shouldered. In his hand, they could make out the distinct shape of a gun. "Police!" "Drop your weapon!" Robert shouted, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. Instead of complying, the figure turned and ran. Without hesitation, Robert and Claire gave chase, their hearts pounding as they pursued the suspect through the labyrinthine warehouse. As they ran, Claire's mind raced. Who was this man? Was he responsible for the disappearances? And most importantly, where were the children now? The chase led them through a maze of abandoned machinery and stacked crates. The suspect seemed to know the layout well, ducking and weaving with practiced ease. But Robert and Claire were determined not to let him escape. Just as they thought they were gaining ground, a stack of crates toppled behind them, nearly crushing Claire. As Robert helped her to her feet, they realized they had lost sight of their quarry. "Damn it," Robert cursed, frustration evident in his voice. "We need backup. Now." As Claire radioed for assistance, the gravity of their discovery began to sink in. What had started as a quiet morning in Santo Amaro had turned into something far more sinister. They had stumbled upon a case that would shake their sleepy village to its core, and they knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The once quiet village of Santo Amaro was now abuzz with activity. Police cars and forensic vans surrounded the old Santos warehouse, their lights painting the decrepit building in alternating flashes of red and blue. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area, keeping curious onlookers at bay. Inside the warehouse, Robert and Claire watched as their colleagues meticulously catalogued and photographed every piece of evidence. The corkboard, with its haunting collection of photos and newspaper clippings, had become the centerpiece of the investigation. Detective Maria Gomez, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, approached the two officers. "Martinez, Thompson." She nodded curtly. "I need your full report. Start from the beginning, and don't leave out a single detail." As Robert and Claire recounted the morning's events, from the mysterious dog to their harrowing chase through the warehouse, Maria's expression grew increasingly grave. "And the dog?" she asked when they had finished. "Where is it now?" Robert and Claire exchanged puzzled glances. In the chaos of the chase and the subsequent arrival of backup, they had completely forgotten about the animal that had led them to this discovery. I'm not sure, Claire admitted. It was here when we found the evidence, but after that, Maria sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. All right, add finding this dog to your list of priorities. It might be nothing, but in a case like this, we can't afford to overlook any potential lead. As Maria walked away to coordinate with the forensics team, Robert turned to Claire, his brow furrowed in concern. Claire, something's been bothering me. That man we chased, did you notice anything familiar about him? Claire thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, it all happened so fast. Why, did you recognize him? Robert hesitated before responding. I'm not sure, but there was something about his build, the way he moved. It reminded me of someone, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Before Claire could press further, they were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance of the warehouse. A distraught woman had arrived at the scene and was trying to push past the police barricade. Please, you have to let me through, she cried, her voice thick with emotion. My son, my Miguel, is he here? Robert and Claire exchanged a look of recognition. This must be Miguel Santos' mother, the boy whose photo they had seen on the evidence board. As they approached the woman to try and calm her down, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of a much larger, more sinister operation. The quiet life they had known in Santo Amaro seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a dark undercurrent of fear and suspicion. Little did they know, their investigation was about to take an even more personal turn, one that would test their resolve and shake their faith in everything they thought they knew about their peaceful village. As the days passed, the investigation into the child disappearances consumed the small police force of Santo Amaro. Robert and Claire found themselves working long hours, poring over evidence and following up on every lead, no matter how small. The village, once a picture of tranquility, now buzzed with tension and fear. Parents kept their children close, eyeing strangers with suspicion. The sense of community that had defined Santo Amaro for generations was slowly eroding, replaced by a pervasive paranoia. One evening, as Robert and Claire were leaving the station after another grueling day, they were approached by an elderly woman they recognized as Donna Beatriz, the village's unofficial historian and gossip queen. Officers, she called out, her voice quavering with age and excitement. I have something to tell you about the warehouse, something that happened years ago. Intrigued, they listened as Donna Beatriz spun a tale of the warehouse's dark past. According to her, decades ago, the building had been at the center of another scandal involving missing children. The case had been hushed up, she claimed, by powerful people who didn't want the village's reputation tarnished. As they bid Donna Beatriz goodnight, Claire turned to Robert with a troubled expression. Do you think there's any truth to her story? Could this have been going on for that long? Robert shook his head, looking equally disturbed. I don't know, Claire, but if there's even a grain of truth to it, this case is bigger than we imagined. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a familiar brown shape darting across the street. The dog that had led them to the warehouse was back, and once again, it seemed determined to show them something. Without hesitation, they followed the animal as it led them through the winding streets of Santo Amaro. This time, however, their journey ended not at the warehouse, but at the doorstep of one of the village's most respected citizens, Judge Carlos Mendez. The dog scratched at the judge's door before disappearing into the shadows, leaving Robert and Claire staring at each other in disbelief. This can't be right, Robert muttered, his face pale in the moonlight. Judge Mendez. He's been a pillar of this community for decades. Claire's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't even realized were there. Robert. Claire's sharp eyes caught sight of something behind the judge, a flash of color that looked suspiciously like one of the backpacks they had found in the warehouse. Her heart pounding, Claire realized that their investigation had just taken a turn that would shake Santo Amaro to its very foundations. The question now was, who could they trust when it seemed that corruption might reach to the highest levels of their community? The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Robert and Claire. Their suspicions about Judge Mendez gnawed at them, but they knew they couldn't act without concrete evidence. They decided to keep their theories to themselves for the time being, wary of tipping off any potential accomplices. As they delved deeper into the case, more unsettling connections began to emerge. Financial records showed large, unexplained deposits into accounts belonging to several prominent Santo Amaro citizens. Anonymous tips led them to discover hidden cameras in various locations around the village, including the local school and playground. The web of conspiracy seemed to grow with each passing hour, and Robert and Claire found themselves questioning everything and everyone they had once trusted. One afternoon, as they were reviewing security footage from a local shop, Claire noticed something peculiar. "Robert, look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. "Isn't that Father Antonio's car?" Robert leaned in, his brow furrowing as he recognized the vehicle. It was parked outside the shop at 2 a.m., long after the kindly parish priest should have been in bed. As they watched, a figure emerged from the shadows, carrying what looked like a small, lifeless bundle. "Oh, God," Claire breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Is that a child?" The grainy footage didn't provide a clear view of the figure's face, but the implication was clear. Their list of suspects had just grown to include one of the most beloved members of their community. As they grappled with this new development, a knock at the door startled them. It was Maria Gomez, her face grim. "We've got a problem," Maria announced without preamble. "Someone's been tampering with evidence, the corkboard from the warehouse. Half the photos are missing, and the logbook documenting the evidence has been altered." Robert and Claire exchanged alarmed glances. This was worse than they had imagined. Not only were they dealing with a vast conspiracy, but it had apparently infiltrated their own police force. "Who had access to the evidence room?" Robert asked, his voice tight with tension. Maria shook her head. "That's the thing. According to the access logs, no one entered the room last night. But the security camera conveniently malfunctioned for a 2-hour window." As the implications of this new development sank in, Claire's phone buzzed with a text message. Her eyes widened as she read it. "It's from an unknown number," she said, showing the screen to Robert and Maria. The message was brief but chilling. "Stop digging, or the children will suffer." A heavy silence fell over the room. They were now certain that they were dealing with a powerful and ruthless organization, one that had no qualms about threatening innocent lives to protect its secrets. "We need to bring in outside help," Maria decided, her jaw set with determination. "I'm calling the federal police. This case is too big, too dangerous for us to handle alone." As Maria stepped out to make the call, Robert turned to Claire, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "Claire, I think it's time we told Maria about our suspicions regarding Judge Mendez and Father Antonio." Claire nodded in agreement. "You're right, we can't keep this to ourselves any longer. But Robert, who can we really trust? If they've infiltrated the police force, how deep does this go?" Before Robert could respond, a commotion erupted outside their office. They rushed out to find Officer Lopez, one of their younger colleagues, being restrained by 2 other officers. His face was contorted with rage as he shouted accusations. "You're all blind!" he yelled, struggling against his captors. "Can't you see what's happening? They're everywhere, controlling everything." As Lopez was led away, still ranting, Robert and Claire shared a worried look. Was Lopez onto something, or was the stress of the case causing him to crack? Just then, Maria returned, her face pale. "The feds are on their way," she announced. "But there's more. A body has been found in the old church cemetery. It's Judge Mendez." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Judge Mendez, their prime suspect, was dead. Was this a silencing tactic by the rest of the conspiracy? Or had they been wrong about him all along? As they prepared to head to the crime scene, Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were following their every move. The quiet village of Santo Amaro now seemed like a sinister labyrinth, filled with shadows and secrets. Little did they know, the most shocking revelations were yet to come, and the true extent of the conspiracy would test their resolve and their relationships to the breaking point. The discovery of Judge Mendez, body in the old church cemetery, sent shockwaves through Santo Amaro. As Robert and Claire arrived at the scene, they were struck by the eerie calm that hung over the ancient graveyard. The judge's body lay sprawled across a weathered tombstone, his unseeing eyes staring up at the overcast sky. Dr. Sofia Almeida, the local medical examiner, was already examining the body. She looked up as the detectives approached, her face grim. "Cause of death appears to be strangulation," she reported. "But there's something odd." They had suspected the judge of being involved in the conspiracy, but it seemed he had been working to expose it from the inside. His death now took on a new, tragic significance. As they continued to process the scene, Claire noticed something glinting in the grass near the body. She bent down to examine it and found a small, ornate key. "Robert, look at this," she called, holding up the key. "It looks old, maybe for a church door." Before Robert could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Father Antonio. The priest's face was ashen as he took in the scene before him. "Oh, merciful heavens," he gasped, crossing himself. "What has happened here?" Claire watched the priest carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or deception, but all she saw was genuine shock and grief. "Father," Robert said gently, "we need to ask you some questions, in private, if possible." As they led Father Antonio away from the crime scene, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The mention of catacombs in the judge's note nagged at her. Santo Amaro was an old town with a history stretching back centuries. Could there really be hidden passages beneath their feet? Their interrogation of Father Antonio yielded little new information. The priest seemed genuinely distraught by the judge's death and vehemently denied any knowledge of missing children or secret catacombs. As they left the church, Robert pulled Claire aside. "We need to search this place," he whispered urgently. "Tonight, after everyone's gone. If there are catacombs, we need to find them." Claire nodded in agreement, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and fear. They were close to uncovering the truth. She could feel it. But at what cost? That night, as they prepared to break into the church, Claire received another text from the unknown number. "You're getting warmer. But remember, curiosity killed the cat." The message sent a chill down her spine, but it also strengthened her resolve. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath Santo Amaro, she and Robert were determined to bring them to light. As they approached the church under the cover of darkness, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows, a familiar brown dog sitting obediently at its feet. The stage was set for revelations that would shake Santo Amaro to its very foundations and test the bonds of trust between Robert and Claire in ways they could never have imagined. The old church loomed before them, its stone facade bathed in moonlight. Robert and Claire moved silently, their hearts pounding as they approached the ancient wooden doors. Claire produced the ornate key they had found near Judge Mendez's body, her hand trembling slightly as she inserted it into the lock. To their surprise, the key fit perfectly. With a soft click, the door swung open, revealing the darkened interior of the church. "I can't believe we're doing this," Claire whispered as they slipped inside, flashlights in hand. "Breaking into a church. If we're wrong about this, our careers are over." Robert squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "We have to know the truth, Claire, for the children." They moved cautiously through the nave, their flashlight beams dancing across weathered pews and religious icons. At the altar, Robert noticed something odd about the floor. "Claire, look at this," he called softly. "These tiles, they don't match the others." Together, they pushed aside the heavy altar rug, revealing a trapdoor hidden beneath. It took both of their strength to lift the iron ring and pull the door open, exposing a narrow stone staircase that descended into darkness. Exchanging a determined look, they began their descent. The air grew colder and damper as they spiraled downward, the beam of their flashlights barely penetrating the gloom ahead. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a vast underground chamber. Ancient stonework arched overhead, and branching tunnels led off in several directions. The walls were lined with niches, many containing centuries-old bones. "The catacombs," Claire breathed, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. They're real. As they explored further, they began to notice signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints in the dust, modern locks on some of the doors, and, disturbingly, what looked like small handprints on some of the walls. "Oh God, Robert," Claire choked out, her flashlight beam illuminating a child-sized shoe abandoned in a corner. "They really are down here." Just then, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold, the distant echo of a child's cry. Without hesitation, they sprinted towards the source of the sound, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they navigated the twisting tunnels. They burst through a heavy wooden door and found themselves in a large chamber. What they saw there would haunt them for years to come. A group of children, some as young as 5 or 6, huddled together in a makeshift pen. They looked frightened and malnourished, their wide eyes blinking in the sudden light, but it was the figure standing over them that caused Robert and Claire to freeze in shock. There, holding a clipboard and looking utterly unfazed by their intrusion, stood Dr. Sophia Almeida, the town's trusted medical examiner. "Ah, detectives," she said calmly, as if greeting them at a crime scene. "I was wondering when you'd find your way down here." "Sophia," Robert gasped, his mind reeling. "What? How? Why?" Dr. Almeida's serene expression never wavered. "Why? For science, of course. These children are part of something much bigger than you can imagine, a project that will change the world." As she spoke, shadows moved at the edges of the chamber. Robert and Claire found themselves surrounded by hooded figures, each bearing the symbol of a serpent eating its own tail. "You see," Dr. Almeida continued, her voice taking on a fervent quality, "we are on the brink of unlocking the secrets of human potential. These children are the key. Their suffering will pave the way for a new era of human evolution." Claire's hand moved slowly towards her weapon, but one of the hooded figures was faster. A sharp pain bloomed in her neck, and she felt her consciousness slipping away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Robert collapsing beside her, and the eerily calm face of Dr. Almeida looming over them both. As Claire's world faded to black, she couldn't help but wonder, had they finally uncovered the truth, only to become its next victims? Claire awoke to the sound of dripping water and the feel of cold stone against her cheek. As her vision cleared, she found herself in a small, dank cell. Beside her, Robert was just beginning to stir. "Robert," she whispered urgently, shaking him awake. "Are you okay?" He groaned, sitting up slowly. "I think so. Where are we?" Before Claire could respond, the cell door creaked open. Dr. Almeida entered, flanked by 2 hooded figures. "I hope you found your accommodations adequate," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We have much to discuss." Over the next hour, Dr. Almeida revealed the full scope of the conspiracy that had taken root in Santo Amaro. The secret society, known as the Ouroboros, had existed for centuries, always working in the shadows to push the boundaries of human potential. Santo Amaro, with its isolated location and trusting populace, had been the perfect testing ground for their most ambitious project yet. The children were being subjected to a series of experiments designed to unlock latent psychic abilities. "You're insane," Robert spat, struggling against his restraints. "You can't just experiment on innocent children." Dr. Almeida's eyes flashed with anger. "Insane. We are visionaries. The suffering of a few will lead to the advancement of our entire species." As she spoke, Claire's mind raced. Something about this whole situation felt off. The way Dr. Almeida was so freely sharing information, the fact that they were still alive. It all pointed to one chilling conclusion. "You're not planning on letting us go, are you?" Claire said softly, meeting Dr. Almeida's gaze. "We're your next test subjects." The doctor's slow smile confirmed Claire's worst fears. "Very perceptive, Detective Thompson. Yes, adults have proven less adaptable to our methods, but with your unique experiences and training, you may be just what we need to push our research to the next level." As Dr. Almeida turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Oh, and don't bother trying to escape. Even if you could get out of this cell, the catacombs are a labyrinth. You'd never find your way out alive." Left alone once more, Robert and Claire fell into a tense silence. The gravity of their situation weighed heavily upon them. "Claire," Robert said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "if we don't make it out of here, there's something I need to tell you." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Even in this dire situation, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation. "What is it, Robert?" But before he could respond, a familiar sound echoed through the cell, the bark of a dog. They turned to see the same brown mutt that had led them to the warehouse, now somehow inside their cell. In its mouth was a ring of keys. Hope surged through Claire as she realized that their mysterious canine ally had come through for them once again. As Robert worked to free them from their restraints, Claire's mind whirled with possibilities. Who was behind this dog? How had it known where to find them? And most importantly, could they trust it to lead them out of this underground nightmare? As they prepared to make their escape, Claire knew that the answers to these questions, and the final confrontation with the Ouroboros Society, lay just ahead. But first, they had a group of terrified children to save. With determination in their hearts and their faithful canine guide leading the way, Robert and Claire stepped out into the twisting corridors of the catacombs, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in their quest for justice. The catacombs were a maze of shadow and stone, each turn bringing new dangers and difficult choices. Robert and Claire, guided by their mysterious canine companion, moved as quickly and quietly as they could, their senses on high alert for any sign of the Ouroboros cultists. They had managed to locate and free the imprisoned children, a group of wide-eyed, trembling young ones who clung to them like lifelines. Now, the challenge was to find a way out while protecting their vulnerable charges. As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded. The dog seemed to know exactly where it was going, but each turn brought them closer to the heart of the complex rather than towards an exit. "Robert," she whispered, pulling him aside as the children huddled together in a small alcove. "Something's not right. This feels like a trap." Robert nodded grimly. "I know. But what choice do we have? We can't stay here, and we don't know the way out on our own." Just then the dog let out a low growl, its hackles rising. From the shadows ahead emerged a figure they had come to trust implicitly over the years, Detective Maria Gomes. "Maria!" Claire exclaimed, relief flooding through her. "Thank God you're here. We need to get these children out." She stopped short as Maria raised a hand, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Claire." With a sinking feeling, Claire and Robert watched as Maria was joined by several hooded figures, including Dr. Almeida. "You see," Maria continued, her voice tinged with regret, "I've been part of this from the beginning. The Ouroboros offered me a chance to be part of something greater than myself, to help shape the future of humanity." The betrayal hit Claire like a physical blow. "All this time, you were one of them." Maria nodded slowly. "I never wanted it to come to this. I hoped you would eventually understand, join us willingly, but now," she gestured to the cultists around her, "now, we have no choice but to proceed with you as unwilling participants." As the hooded figures began to close in, the dog suddenly sprang into action. It launched itself at Maria, catching her off guard and sending her stumbling into Dr. Almeida. In the ensuing chaos, Robert and Claire seized their chance. "Run!" Robert yelled, scooping up the youngest of the children. Claire grabbed the hands of two others, and they bolted down a side passage, the faithful dog leading the way. What followed was a heart-pounding chase through the twisting catacombs. The cultists were in hot pursuit, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Robert and Claire pushed themselves to their limits, guiding the terrified children through the maze-like passages, just when it seemed they might be cornered. The dog led them to a hidden doorway, concealed behind a centuries-old tapestry. They burst through into a vast chamber, unlike anything they had seen before. The room was a bizarre blend of ancient architecture and modern technology. Glowing screens lined the walls, displaying incomprehensible data. In the center stood a massive machine, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "What in the world?" Robert breathed, taking in the surreal scene. Before they could process what they were seeing, Dr. Almeida's voice rang out from behind them. "Magnificent, isn't it?" she said, entering the chamber with Maria and the other cultists. "This is the culmination of centuries of research and sacrifice, the key to unlocking humanity's true potential." As the cultists spread out to surround them, Claire noticed something odd about the dog. Its form seemed to be shifting, blurring at the edges. Suddenly, in a flash of light that momentarily blinded everyone in the room, the dog transformed. In its place stood a man, older, distinguished, with kind eyes that held a hint of sadness. It took Claire a moment to recognize him from the photos they had seen during their investigation. "Judge Mendes," she gasped. The judge nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for the deception, but it was necessary. I've been working for years to bring down the Ouroboros from the inside. When they discovered my betrayal, they tried to eliminate me. But they underestimated the power of their own experiments." Dr. Almeida's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible! The transformation process was never successful in adults." "You're wrong, Sophia," Judge Mendes said quietly. "It worked all too well, but in gaining these abilities, I saw the true horror of what you were doing, the pain you were inflicting on innocent children. It had to be stopped." As he spoke, the judge's form began to shimmer again. With a series of rapid transformations, he took on the appearances of various people they had encountered during their investigation. The elderly Donna Beatriz, Officer Lopez, even Father Antonio. "You've all been pawns in a larger game," the judge explained, his voice changing with each transformation. "I needed to guide you to the truth without exposing myself, but now, the charade is over." Dr. Almeida's shock quickly turned to rage. "Seize them!" she shouted to her followers. "The children, the detectives, and the traitor. They'll all become part of our great work, willing or not." As the cultists rushed forward, Judge Mendes sprang into action. Moving with inhuman speed and agility, he engaged the attackers, creating an opening for Robert and Claire. "Get the children out of here," he yelled, fending off two cultists at once. "Hey, there's a hidden exit behind the main console. I'll hold them off." Robert hesitated for a split second, torn between helping the judge and protecting the children, but Claire was already moving, guiding the young ones towards the indicated escape route. "Robert, come on," she called urgently. With a final glance at the chaos erupting behind them, Robert joined Claire at the console. They worked quickly to open the secret passage, ushering the children through to safety. As Claire prepared to follow them, she turned back one last time. The scene before her was one of utter pandemonium. Judge Mendes, still shifting between forms, was locked in combat with Dr. Almeida and Maria. The massive machine in the center of the room was beginning to spark and shake ominously. "Claire, we have to go now," Robert shouted, grabbing her arm. With a heavy heart, Claire allowed herself to be pulled into the escape tunnel. As the hidden door slid shut behind them, they heard a massive explosion rock the chamber. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning as they climbed steadily upward. Finally, they emerged into the cool night air, finding themselves in the old church cemetery where Judge Mendes' body had been discovered. As they caught their breath, surrounded by the confused and frightened children they had rescued, Claire and Robert shared a look of disbelief. They had uncovered a conspiracy beyond their wildest imaginations, faced betrayals and impossible transformations, and somehow made it. But as the distant wail of sirens approached, they knew their ordeal was far from over. Buried beneath Santo Amaro had been explosive in more ways than one, and the aftershocks would be felt for years to come. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Claire finally allowed herself to voice the question that had been nagging at her since their harrowing escape. "Robert," she said softly, turning to her partner, "what was it you wanted to tell me down in that cell? You know, before the dog, Judge Mendes, showed up." Robert met her gaze, a mix of emotions playing across his face. After everything they had been through, after all the lies and deceptions they had uncovered, he knew it was time for nothing but the truth. "Claire," he began, taking her hand in his, But before he could finish, They were interrupted by the arrival of the federal agents, their vehicles screeching to a halt at the cemetery gates. As they were swarmed by officials demanding explanations, Claire couldn't help but feel that the biggest mystery of all, the one in Robert's heart, would have to wait just a little bit longer to be solved. As the sun rose over Santo Amaro, bathing the village in golden light, Claire knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But with Robert by her side and the truth finally brought to light, she was ready to face whatever the future might hold.